But if companies are saying with it in existence, they aren't going to come forward and build that pipeline, doesn't your government have a problem? Do you not kind of have to pick a lane?
Is Carney's new pipeline deal falling apart? Welcome back to Moose on Loose. My name's David. Today, Carney's MOU deadline for a pipeline to the West Coast is coming and going with no deal in sight. We got the price of gas absolutely exploding. The Liberals don't seem to care the pressure Canadians are facing, but what they do care about is carbon capture. Let's jump into this. Starting this episode off, we have a fuel shortage in Australia, as more than 100 Victorian petrol stations confirmed to have run out of fuel as prices surge across the state. So Australia running out of fuel because of the conflict in Iran. South Korea just announced that every vehicle is banned from the road 1 day per week. India is running out of fuel. There was another video showing that. A bunch of motorbikes lined up at the gas stations. It does not help that the Valero Port Arthur refinery, one of the largest in the United States, was hit with some sort of explosive or something exploded. This facility processes 395,000 barrels a day of crude oil down in the Gulf Coast. I don't know. Something's happening here.
Hurt my ears. Oh, leave. I don't know why I'm staying.
Yeah, I don't know if this is retaliation or what this is. Meanwhile, what does the Canadian government have to say when asked about making gas prices cheaper for Canadians?
Do you think your government can help Canadians with that in any way?
Well, we're monitoring, as you would expect, the situation very, very closely, talking also with our G7 partners. You saw Canada did its part with respect to a release of barrel. So we're monitoring. Like I said, it's a very, if the world was uncertain, now the world is volatile and complex.
That's right. It's volatile, it's complex, dangerous and divided, but they're monitoring the situation. They could cut GST off of gas right now to make fuel cheaper and more affordable for Canadians. They just don't care about us. Meanwhile, we've got National Bank CEO pushes for Keystone XL revival and Energy East Corridor. Wow. Do you think the Carney Liberals are going to go for it? I don't think so. Not unless Carney can attach a Pathways project or some sort of carbon credit to it. Laurent says Canada needs to boost its domestic energy output and distribution as well as global exports in order to become an energy superpower. They know how. Mark Carney's not stupid. He's just trying to get rich off of our backs, and he's not going to fire up Keystone XL anytime soon. We need to revive Keystone right now, Laurent Ferreira said at the bank's annual financial services conference in Montreal. The infrastructure is already partially built. Yes, it is. So Canada's portion of Keystone XL is already built. They just need to attach it to the American side. It's stupid that this is not pumping oil right now. Meanwhile, we've got this coming down the pipe, pun definitely intended. Smith-Carney pipeline deal to miss early deadlines, Premier says. Looks like the MOU was just an MOU and no deal is happening here. Now, will there be a deal? Who knows? We know Carney really wants to get that Pathways project going. Spend, $15 billion of our money pulling carbon out of the air, then turn it into credit so Brookfield can make money off of it. As Mark Nixon says, the problem is Mark Carney's invested in the Pathways project carbon capture. He needs to get his returns, no pipeline. That project will be able to solidify Brookfield on the world stage and bring in carbon credits as a major policy across Canada. And Mark Carney can roll that out. That's one thing that's much better in America. Each state almost operates like an individual country that brings in a lot of their own rules and laws. But in Canada, it can be good or bad. You have a bad prime minister like Carney. He can just put in carbon credits across the board, across all provinces, and we have to abide by these rules, like they've done with the industrial carbon tax. With that, we've got Energy Minister Tim Hodgson here sitting down with Bloomberg, looking like an absolute buffoon.
At a critical moment, allies, of course, in desperate need of oil. Canada's ability to supply it is limited by pipeline infrastructure. Let's talk about ongoing talks with Alberta. How much closer is Canada to construction on a new pipeline to the Pacific?
So we have what's called a memorandum of understanding with Alberta about how we move forward on that. As you know, we built a new pipeline to the West Coast, the TMX, that came on stream in 2024. We're already talking about expanding that pipeline.
You know, it's that wording there. We're already expanding. Well, talking about expanding. They're not doing anything. It's all loose talk. They could have already started expanding that the day Carney got into office. And you notice too, he's deflecting from the question about getting new pipeline. Well, we did build that one over there. Let's just talk about that. And we're talking about something else over here. We got the MOU. As we know, that MOU is not going to make the deadline now, but they are still increasing the industrial carbon tax on Canadians who are already suffering through poverty.
We built a natural gas pipeline to the West Coast, the Coastal Gas Link, which is now firing the only LNG plant on the west coast of North America, which is coming up to speed. That's really important for our allies. We have a series of discussions going on about another 1 million barrel pipeline to the West Coast, and we're heads down working on that. We're confident we're going to get there.
On that pipeline, though.
Heads down working on that. This guy just came off a 1-week vacation. He's not heads down doing anything but getting his bunions rubbed by the beach.
You said that the government does not want to fund the new West Coast oil pipeline. Are you getting interest from the private sector?
So that pipeline, the proponent of that's going to be the government of Alberta. The government of Alberta is working with multiple different pipeline private sector companies right now. They're the proponent. They've said they'll be ready to come to us in June of this year with that proposal. And when they do, we'll evaluate it. And we have a shared goal of trying to help our allies get more oil.
Your government supports a new oil pipeline to Canada's West Coast. But for that to happen, you've said that companies must build carbon capture in the oil sands. You've set that April 15th deadline. Do you think you'll meet it?
We are in intense discussions right now. I was talking with Premier Smith yesterday.
So when he does that big long, it's pretty telling every time he says that. It's a tell he's lying or he's about to extend the truth because we already know they're not going to make that deadline.
I am confident we share a goal of building the biggest carbon capture project in the world. It's called the Pathways Project. We take 16 million tons of carbon a year out of the atmosphere, and it would significantly reduce the carbon intensity of all of our barrels. When we do that, we have the ability to add millions of barrels a day of production and build that pipeline to the West Coast.
You notice his language here is not talking about making life more affordable for Canadians, better lives for Canadians. It's all about pulling carbon out of the air. They don't care about us. Canadians have to eventually see this here. These guys do not love our country. I mean, he's an American himself. He's an American citizen. They don't care about us. And that's not to say that American citizens can't love Canada as well, but in his position there where his investments are mostly in America like Mark Carney's are, and they won't share them with us, well, then there's probably some conflicts of interest, not to mention their actions are pro-America, not pro-Canada. Now, I loaded up the Moose chart here just to briefly look at the Pathways project here. He's talking 16 billion tons of carbon. Who cares? This will cost billions of dollars. A Pathways carbon capture project is not viable. This article here is quite scathing. Goes on to talk about how this is a green utopia. It's going to be a big waste of money. And not only that, injecting this carbon into the earth is not necessarily the safest thing. It makes that ground area very toxic. It can destabilize the ground and cause potholes and sinkholes and destabilize the land there. And sure, they can say, well, we're going to go do it out in the middle of nowhere. It's like, why? Why are we wasting our money doing this? It doesn't do anything for the planet. It just costs us a bunch of money. And that's a question they can't answer. So this article here says the report indicates that the underperforming and unprofitable carbon capture project would invariably struggle to bring lasting positive economic benefits to host communities and become dependent on external financial subsidies to maintain operations, aka the taxpayers. Even under optimal conditions, the Pathways project may struggle to even break even, the IEEFA noted. It further stated that real-world carbon capture operations are rarely optimal, echoing analysis by the International Institute for Sustainable Development. This is a disaster waiting to happen. We could build 2 pipelines for the cost of one to the West Coast plus Pathways project. Goes on to mention the safety risks here, as I just stated. Injecting this much CO2 has vitally important and unanswered questions. The release of estimated 100,000 to 300,000 tons of CO2 at Lake Nyos, Cameroon in 1986 killed about 1,700 people and 3,500 livestock animals. The rupture, of all words, of CO2 pipelines near Satartia, Mississippi in 2020 resulted in dozens of hospitalizations. Who wants to be living near this? Because as it says, large-scale carbon dioxide poisons the environment. And on top of all of this, Mark Carney's invested in ExxonMobil, ConocoPhillips, and Canadian Natural Resources, 3 companies that are part of this Pathways Project alliance. This is a conflict of interest. It's a direct conflict of interest. Right on his own disclosure here off the government's website, Canadian Natural Resources right there, ConocoPhillips is right there, and ExxonMobil Corp right there. Carney's invested in this project that he wants to force upon us. In that previous interview, he's bragging about the one LNG facility we have on the West Coast, when meanwhile we should have numerous LNG facilities and increasing supply for our allies. We're nowhere near close to that. We have one facility that will be coming online, and that's it.
And as their LNG facilities are ramping up to solve some of the problems our allies have because of what's happening in the Middle East, it is critical that they continue to get that gas and more gas from Canada. We will be that good ally, that responsible ally. At the same time, we are hearing directly from our allies in Asia, our allies in Europe, that they want to buy gas directly from us.
Boat sailed when Trudeau went limp. America is the LNG exporter dominator. Canada cannot catch up now unless we nationalize it fully and do it as a national priority, perhaps then, but Ottawa is very weak to be decisive. Yeah, Justin Trudeau screwed us over. Mark Carney's the nail in the coffin here. No kidding, they've been begging us for our LNG for 5 years. Now, we do have the voice of reason on here, Kate Harrison. This is not Kate Harrison. There's Kate Harrison on CBC regarding Carney and Tim Hodgson failing to move forward with the pipeline to the west and meeting their deadline.
Kate, are you concerned when you hear that April 1st deadline is not going to come together, especially on some key aspects of the deal?
Well, I think it is the wrong signal to be sending to the market that even on something like an internal deadline between two levels of government, we're not observing it. I'm not sure it's realistic either to expect Pathway as an industry to come together and engage in a conversation when questions are still outstanding around methane emissions and the carbon tax. So at a time when the global demand signal for oil and gas has perhaps never been as high as it has been in the last decade or more, that Canada can't get its act together to help solve for these things is a very detrimental signal to provide to the market. There's obviously a huge conference happening right now south of the border on energy. Oil and gas development is all anybody is talking about. And even on the most modest and meager types of advancement on a pipeline and an energy deal here, Canada and Alberta aren't able to meet those deadlines. It's the wrong signal to be sending at a time when everybody is looking to Canada for some potential movement. I will say that Corey Hogan, the parliamentary secretary to the minister, sounded pretty optimistic when I spoke to him earlier. When I interviewed him, he kind of dismissed this April 1st deadline. You know, we're working through complicated issues, he says, and perhaps there's a point to that.
Yeah, the only point is Corey Hogan's a bootlicker, and we'll bring him up next. We got CBC Watcher with a clip here on CTV. You got to think to yourself, what has Carney done in the past year? What has he actually gone forward with? And it's only this deal with China to bring in their Chinese EVs into our country. That's it. That's not great for our auto industry. Are Liberal voters really happy with what they're seeing right now? I mean, clearly they're just easily confused. The polling data is just absurd.
On the point of what I think you're getting at around, companies, oil companies basically involved in Pathways, seeing this moment as something that they can negotiate around. Some of those companies are asking for, if they are a part of carbon capture, the industrial carbon price essentially not to apply to them. Is that something your government's open to?
If they're part of carbon capture, they're not releasing carbon and they don't pay a carbon price. So I think that's kind of almost circular logic. But they...
You hear that? If you're part of it, you don't pay the price. But if you aren't a part of it, you have to pay the price. And what does that mean? It's carbon credits. They have to pay a carbon credit to be able to sell the product. And any product coming in, say if we're buying gas from Australia and it's not as eco and green as Canadian gas or the standards they set, they have to buy a carbon credit to offset their emissions, especially shipping that over from Australia. And who provides those carbon credits? Well, it's Brookfield. And all these companies like Brookfield or Brookfield works with, all their subsidiaries, and all these companies will be tied into Mark Carney's Brookfield Global Transition Fund 1 that he makes money off of.
They're obviously interested in how they can do that in the most economic way possible and allow them to still continue to invest in oil and gas and grow their positions. And those are conversations we're keen to have with them. But the government's been very clear. Carbon pricing, action on methane, pathways, these are three legs of a stool that allow us to be that energy superpower in the 21st century.
I think that part of what those investors are also, or those companies are also talking about, is more certainty when it comes to some of the regulatory impediments that they see. I named one in the case of Enbridge and the tanker ban. I know your government has put forth that C5 is kind of your way around that, right? Should it be required on an ad hoc basis, C5 would get around something like the tanker ban. Again, most oil companies are saying that just simply isn't enough certainty to be able to back something like a new pipeline. Is your government open to getting rid of that tanker ban altogether versus just relying on C5, which I would also note has never been used, though it was passed on an emergency basis last year?
Well, so the MOU says if needed, there will be an exemption to the tanker ban to allow a pipeline to be built. This was a voluntary ban from the 80s that's been extended and put into law in the 2010s. It's not a new thing, and it's certainly not even a Trudeau era thing, in the broadest sense. But we are going to be pragmatic about how we...
in the broadest sense. We've had this for a long time, guys. Don't worry. This is a good thing for our country. This is a tactic here to try to diminish what they're doing here with his industrial carbon tax that Mark Carney's jacking through the roof.
Approach that. We're not looking to wholesale change legislation. We're looking to make sure we're doing very targeted interventions to make sure things can happen. But I also want to underline, it's a very big coast. And Premier Smith talked about 5 different ports that the government of Alberta is looking at when they're working with proponents to bring forward a pipeline proposal, which they've been planning to do and continue to plan to do in June. And not all of those routes would require a tanker ban to be modified even.
So it was voluntary, but it was codified under Trudeau. So it very much, I think, in the view of a number of Canadians, is a Trudeau-era thing. And it is...
Thank you, Vasi, for bringing that up. Voluntary emissions reduction doesn't really mean anything, aside from whoever the woke mayor is of a city or of a province, until it gets solidified, codified, as she said, into law by Justin Trudeau. So yes, this is a Liberal thing from the past 10 years.
One that we consistently hear from those provinces that are resource producing, like Alberta and Saskatchewan, and from companies that would be investors in a pipeline going to the West Coast, is an impediment to their willingness to back something like a pipeline. I take your point that it may not even be necessary if the pipeline doesn't go to that exact spot. But if companies are saying with it in existence, they aren't going to come forward and build that pipeline, doesn't your government have a problem? Do you not kind of have to pick a lane?
Well, I think we have the starting point of a conversation in that case. But we have said that we're looking at pragmatic ways we can defend both the coast and Canada's energy interests, which include diversifying energy. And let's see where that conversation goes.
But how is that going to make Canada, how is a conversation going to make Canada an energy superpower? Something the minister and the prime minister have said explicitly on a number of occasions. Like, how does that work?
I was about to say that, once again, another conversation. These conversations go nowhere. These Liberals should all be forced to sleep in a mud hut until they realize where electricity comes from. They can take a bike to work and they realize where their gas comes from. Do all these guys drive EVs? I doubt it. And even then, that entire industry is supported by oil and gas. There's so many parts of that. It's not like the whole thing runs off of electricity. All the parts that make up those vehicles are made from this utopian electricity that comes from unicorn farts.
Well, every negotiation's a conversation. Every time we have a trade deal, that's a conversation. Conversation's the root of this, and we are happy to have those conversations. We're happy to look at reasonable ways we can move forward. But we also do know that we've got a broader public that also has an expectation we do this in a very pragmatic way, but a very responsible way. And we've got to consider the responsible component as well.
I do take that point on that. And certainly I spent a lot of years covering the environmental policies that the previous government put forward. That government was not saying as explicitly as yours that you're going to make Canada an energy superpower. You know, the criticism from the opposition is it's all conversation and nothing has actually materialized. Again, how will just having a conversation about, regulatory irritants actually get that pipeline built?
You notice his eyes here, they're scanning down to the right. He's looking around. He doesn't have an answer. He knows he's screwed right now.
Well, I do understand that's the opposition's point of view, but we've also got a lot of growing proof points that things are working, including that increase in foreign direct investment, including the fact that in 2025, Canada created more jobs than the United States, not adjusted for population. Like we are.
There it is. They're using this dirty cherry-picked data. So the United States cut, I can't remember, hundreds of thousands of positions from the government. And then that offsets, along with a sluggish quarter, stacked up to be this really low job creation month because, well, they cut hundreds of thousands of jobs. Carney and Hogan, all these guys use that as a talking point to try to make it seem like we're doing really great, but we are not.
I'm going to go here and we're going to get things done. And that is ultimately going to be done best if we can do it in balance and we can make sure we can bring people on board with us. And that is how things get built in Canada. You survive the winter together, you work together, and you're not just going to default to anything goes, because we've seen anything goes means nothing goes. And we've seen projects fail because they fail to meet those standards of environment, Indigenous consultation, and the like.
It's a fair point, and so is FDI, except in the last 2 months, when you talk about jobs versus the United States, we have shed tens of thousands of jobs in the last 2 months, essentially almost erasing the gains from the first part of the year. When you talk about economic growth, it's significantly slowed in the last quarter of the year. But
if we're talking about energy and we're talking about Alberta, in Alberta, jobs actually grew in those same 2 months, and unemployment dropped by 0.4 points. That's fairly significant. And this is all tied to the same story. It's a story
Yeah, it's the same story that Alberta is one of the only provinces that actually is growing in size because it's not focused on this ideological woke nonsense that you have in Quebec and Ontario and the Maritimes, British Columbia. They love to lean on oil and gas when it's convenient, and they love to demonize it when it's also convenient.
Canada being an energy superpower, and it's the story of that energy superpower providing Canada immense benefit.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note, Mr.
Yeah, immense benefit. I'll show you immense benefit. Here we've got Jamie, 56-year-old white male Canadian who paid into the system for 40 years. This is his one-bedroom apartment, no kitchen, no washroom, can't find work. Government pays him $365 a month with zero help on housing. That's right, he lives in his car. Is he going to survive the winter? This is what they've done to Canadians. Corey Hogan should print this out and stick it on his fridge and congratulate himself.